Today we're looking at Unit 5, Notes number 4. This is our last set of notes for this Great Depression New Deal unit. Today we're going to look at the second New Deal. So by 1934, the New Deal was in full swing, and Americans were benefiting. Millions of unemployed Americans had been put to work. Millions more had received direct relief to help meet basic needs. Confidence in the nation's future was surging. However, there was growing opposition to the New Deal. So growing opposition to the New Deal. So the Supreme Court ruled that the programs, the AAA and the NIRA, were unconstitutional. They did this because it gave the federal government too much power over the states. So this is an example of judicial review. So the Supreme Court's job is to make sure that all laws and organizations and powers that have been distributed are according to our Constitution. And so with these acts, it actually gave the federal government too much power. And so because of that, those acts were declared unconstitutional. So there were other people that were in opposition to the New Deal. So here are some of the extremists. So you had liberals who felt that FDR hadn't done enough to help the poor and reform the economy to fix it forever. So they felt that he should have done more. More programs, more New Deal acts. Then there were conservatives. They were formed by the American Liberty League and argued that citizens' rights were in danger. They saw that the federal government was growing in power, they're taking more responsibility, becoming more involved in the everyday life of the American public. So they were concerned about it and didn't like that growing role of the government. So a specific critic was Huey Long. He's pictured right here. He was a senator from Louisiana. Long was FDR's most vocal critic. He proposed a Share Our Wealth program. So he felt that FDR could do more. And so kind of Long was proposing more of a socialist standpoint. So a Share Our Wealth program across the country. And even today, socialism is not always looked upon as the right answer. And so the whole idea of sharing our wealth, which is you take from the rich, give to the poor, make people more equal, of course this is going to cause a lot of controversy, even though this is just an idea. So he felt this would guarantee land, food, and education for all. And as a result of his kind of outspokenness, his controversial attitude, he was assassinated. Huey Long was assassinated in 1935. So Roosevelt responds to the opposition. So with the Supreme Court, Roosevelt viewed them as not being compliant with what he was trying to do. Maybe people on the court weren't necessarily favorable or agreeing to his politics. So in 1937, FDR proposed a court reorganization bill that would change the number of justices to 15. So essentially, it would let FDR add 6 new justices so his programs wouldn't be threatened. So he could pick, so the president appoints the new Supreme Court justices, and Congress has to approve them. So he wanted to appoint people that were favorable to his ideas, his politics, to make sure that his programs could stay in place. And so people saw this as a complete abuse of power. He was criticized for what appeared to be a constitutional power grab. However, people forgave him. So with the Supreme Court, Congress, and the President, there is a whole checks and balances. And so even though the programs were meant to help the public, the country's in a dire situation, the programs that he had created under the AAA and the NIRA did not go by the rules stated within our Constitution. And so that's the Supreme Court's job. So Roosevelt didn't like that, but at the same time, that's why there's another branch to make sure he just doesn't do whatever he wants to do. So he is very highly criticized for this attempt. It did not go through. So some of the extremists, FDR took his message to the people, where he found a majority of Americans had supported him in trying to make these changes to the country. So the court packing bill is commonly seen as the biggest mistake of Roosevelt's presidency. But even despite that, It didn't lose him a lot of support. Again, he was elected 3 more times to be president, but it is something that people are critical of him. So with the support of the nation, FDR launches the Second New Deal, known as the Second 100 Days. So acknowledging that there was still more to do, FDR launched a new wave of programs that focused on long-term recovery and more direct relief to the American workers and farmers. So because the country was in such a deep depression, economic depression, the first New Deal, again, provided assistance, got the economy moving, but it did not solve the Great Depression. There still were people that were out of work, still people facing homelessness. So the second New Deal was meant to continue to provide the support, the relief that people needed. So the second New Deal, helping farmers. So FDR restructured the AAA to make it align with the Constitution. Once again, farmers decreased crop surpluses, which increased farm prices and farmers' income. So he's basically correcting what the court struck down so they can still be in place, but now abiding by the Constitution. So protecting workers. With the NIRA struck down, FDR created the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, also known as the Wagner Act. And so it would protect workers from unfair business practices and protected a union's right to collectively bargain. So it gave unions a lot of power in terms of establishing that they can negotiate, they can have these collective bargaining meetings with employers to ensure that workers are being treated fairly, getting the benefits that they need, and are being paid correctly. So Second New Deal, creating jobs. So creating jobs. In 1935, the Work Progress Administration, the WPA, began putting Americans to work. Its focus was to provide public works jobs to unskilled and professional workers. The WPA created 8 million jobs in various areas of life in America. Its workers built 850 airports, 125,000 public buildings, and laid 651,000 miles of road, made clothes for the needy, and painted murals. So ultimately, their work is fixing our country, improving our country, ultimately, making sidewalks and curbs and roads and buildings and things that we need. And so oftentimes you see these types of plaques, I think I talked about in the last set of notes, of buildings or roads or bridges that were built during this time period. So while these jobs weren't permanent, because once the project was done, people didn't have work anymore, or they would move on to a different project. It gave people dignity because people wanted to go to work. They wanted to work every day. They wanted to earn their income. One worker said, even when a man raked leaves, he got paid and he had some dignity. So he felt like he made money, he could provide for his family, and so it helped us to change the psyche, the mental state of the American public as well. Here are some propaganda posters promoting the WPA and just kind of the overall work that is being done. So propaganda, it's important for the public to know this is where the money's going, the government is funding these programs. That way they are appreciative and they understand everything. So transparency here is key. So the Second New Deal, providing relief and reform. So providing relief and reform. In 1935, FDR signed the Social Security Act, creating the Social Security system. This system is still in effect today. It benefits retirees, the elderly, and the unemployed. So up until this point, no one had Social Security numbers. So after 1935, everyone would be, once you're born, you get issued a Social Security card with your Social Security number. So it's a way to kind of track people. But more importantly is that it created a retirement fund, because some of the people that were hit the hardest from the Great Depression were elderly. A lot of them had their life savings saved up in banks, and so when banks failed, they were left with nothing. And so people didn't like the fact that so many elderly people were homeless and didn't have any type of safety nets. And so Social Security was created as a way for them to be able to get money when they were older. So Social Security provided direct relief to the unemployed and workers on disability. The unemployed temporarily received $15 to $18 a week to meet the needs until they found work. Social Security also provided retirement insurance to the elderly. So the way that Social Security works is that when workers are paid, there's a small percentage that's taken out of their paycheck every time they get paid. And so that goes into a fund for them to collect once they reached an age over 65. And so based on how much they've put in, there's formulas that can calculate what your benefit would be. So Social Security, only certain people can collect Social Security. So people that are in government jobs, the police force, nurses, teachers, we don't collect Social Security because we do not pay into Social Security. So usually people within the government jobs, teachers, policemen, these are just a few. We have our own retirement system. So it's a way to kind of they had to agree to exclude certain workers to make sure that it covered enough. It couldn't cover everybody. That would be too difficult of a task to do. So some more propaganda posters, again, just kind of explaining to people what Social Security is, making sure the public understands how this program is going to work. Because again, keeping your public informed is the best way to increase support for these programs. So the second New Deal, what was the effect? So with programs like Social Security, the WPA, the restructuring of the Agricultural Adjustment Act, it provided some direct relief. We began to see the dignity of work and long-term reform that these programs were providing to our country, and began to lay the groundwork for recovery and security. Ultimately, what we'll see through the 1930s is that the New Deal, the second New Deal, provided band-aids to the Great Depression. It was able to kind of solve smaller problems, smaller issues, but it did not end the Great Depression. We won't see a complete end to the Great Depression until we start gearing up for World War II. Once we begin to, our factories are building tanks and guns and weapons and planes, we need people to go to work. And once the work level increases, then we start to see the Great Depression stopping. So it really isn't until we start gearing up for World War II that we see the Great Depression completely coming to an end. So this is the end of the notes. Make sure you completed all of the other notes for the unit.